Earlier this year, thousands of students and their supporters took to the streets to protest the national education law. Nearly 4 months after one of the largest visions of public disobedience since the 2007 Saffron Revolution, over 70 students and their supporters remain in prison. I'm here today with Dr Thein Lwin from the National Network for Education Reform, an organisation that's taken a leading role in reform negotiation with the government. Dr Thein Lwin, thank you for being with us today. So I'd like to start with discussion of the education system as it stands in Burma. Reform has been fought for fiercely. What is it like currently for students and teachers inside Burma?
After 50 years of military rule, many children, they are not in the classroom. Child soldiers, child labor, child hawkers. And the quality of education, the students, they do not receive the proper skills for their life. The education system is rote learning, and for exam-based system, the quality of teaching is also low. The teachers, they cannot show their responsibility on students. They are doing what the government is asking for. So for this situation, the education level is low, as well as including the higher education. The young graduates, they do not receive the proper education from higher education.
The government says the national education law enacted last year was its chance to turn over a new leaf. Why did students and supporters reject it so fiercely?
The education law approved by the government is the same as the system under the military regime. The system is the very centralized system. So only one curriculum, one textbooks for the whole country. And it is the same. The law, the national education law is just to change wordings from their old system and making as a law. So it doesn't change. The student may protest against the national education law.
This year's protest led to concessions by the government, including an agreement to boost the budget spend to 20% on education. Can amendments to the national education law signed off by Parliament this month be seen as a victory for students?
It's slightly different. The student asks for 20% of national budget for education, but in the law amendment, they would try up to 20%, but there is no time limit. So it is different what student asks and what the amendment of education law. And there are many things. The student asks for the 11 points to change. The 20%, they only use the number 20%, but there is no time limit. And the important thing is the compulsory education. The student asks for at least 9 years of compulsory education. The law does not allow the 9 years compulsory education, only primary level, only the 4 years primary compulsory education in the law. And the other important things, student asks for mother tongue-based multilingual education. The government does not allow, the law does not allow mother tongue-based multilingual education. And inclusive education. The student asks for inclusive education. The government mentioned differently the special schools. This is totally different from what students ask for, inclusive education. So many things students do not receive what they ask for.
The protests have gone on. The leaders have now been jailed. You were at Latpanan on that day. Tell us about what happened at Latpanan.
Yes, that day on 10 March, when students were beaten and arrested, I was there that morning. So I met with the security officer, negotiate to allow students to go to Rangoon peacefully, and the students will stop their marching in Rangoon and go back home. So I explained to the security officer. Early in the morning, he said yes. But later, he changed his promise. Later, he changed the student. He will allow only few people, group by group, and do not holding flags. Students, they are that morning, they hold a meetings or participant at the demonstration, what they will choose. They will agree with the city officer or they will make marching. So majority decided they want to march to Yangon peacefully.
I see. The student unions, the University Student Union and the All Burma Federation of Students' Unions, have had a key role in pushing these protests on. Now, leaders, including student union members, are jailed. How much responsibility do the unions need to take for those students that are in jail?
Yes, all student unions and students are also responsible for the arrested of the students and put in prison. And because at the four-party dialogue, the government, the parliament, the student representatives, and NNER, they all agree that the students who are in protest and their supporters would not be arrested. It was signed. And so students' representatives also signed that agreement. So they are responsible for that agreement, and they are responsible for the students who are in jail.
What was your role in those four-party dialogues with the government at the time? What did you take to them?
I was a representative of NNER, and then NNER explained the 11 points the student demands. Student asked for and change in 11 areas. So myself and NNER explained why it is needed to change. And also when the government and parliament agree with the 11 points, so we create a national educational amendment based on 11 points. So in that position, we were participating at the four-party dialogue.
Did they ask for too much? The 11 points, it seemed like at the beginning the student unions were pushing for small changes to the national education law. Then as the protests grew and they gained supporters, a lot of people started beginning to ask for a lot of different things, and demands on the government increased. Do you think that the students and the student unions and perhaps the National Network for Education Reform asked for too much?
I don't think it is not too much. It is minimum requirement for education reform, the compulsory education, the increasing budget, and mother tongue-based multilingual education, inclusive education, all are needed, so not too much.
The national education law has not gone far enough, in your eyes. Student leaders are now locked up. Who is left to take national education reform forward?
And the education is responsible for all students and teachers and the people. So the education is for the country and for the people. Everybody is responsible for education reform. So everybody should take responsible for education reform.
The National Network for Education Reform recently finished a 3-day conference. Tell us a little bit about what happened there. What were the key messages that came out of that conference?
Yes, the key message is education is linked with peace building and the democratic reform. 3 days conference. We have 6 panel discussions to education and rights, education and peace, education and democracy, education and law. So all these are linked with education reform. Without education reform, we cannot get peace in the country. Without education reform, we cannot restore democracy in this country. For example, Burma is a multi-ethnic nation, so speaking different languages. So students and ethnic educators ask for mother tongue-based multilingual education. So there are language rights, and the rights of the children to get education at school, the language what they understand. So the government does not allow. It is linked with peace. When the ethnic, the minority groups, they are allowed to use their own language, it is close to peace.
There were representatives of ethnic armed organisations at the NNER
Yes.
conference, including Kun Oka, a
Yes.
key member of their National Ceasefire Coordination Team.
Yes.
Will education be a part of political dialogue after the ceasefire process?
Yes, so he said at the conference, education reform is needed. Education reform is guarantee for peace building. So I understand when they talk about the political dialogue with the government, they will bring education reform at the dialogue table.
Going into the election, is it possible that the students who are in jail will be used as a pawn by the government? Their trial is ongoing, it seems almost endless after over half a dozen pre-trial hearings.
Yes.
When will these people be released?
Yes, and when the government want to show and they are good intention, they should release the students. And then also they should keep their promise at the four-party dialogue. The government already agreed the students and their supporter will not be arrested. They already agreed this, they keep their promise. It is a good sign for the government to show the good intention to the students and people.
The NNER was cut out of the drawing up of the national education law last year. The group was promised by the government that it would be involved,
yeah.
And then the government behind its back went ahead and put forward a new law. Can the organisation trust the government to involve them again?
So it is difficult to trust on the government because they do not keep their promise.
Do you think that the students who are out there now can imagine that the government will keep any of the promises that they've made in this amended national education law? Certain things they've promised, 20% extra in the budget. They've promised to allow students to choose their university and choose their course. Will students be happy, or can they not trust the government at all?
And still cannot trust the government because, and the main things, students would not be arrested. And finally they were beaten and arrested. The government did not keep their promise. And at the four-party dialogue, all 11 points were agreed. And all agreed to put these 11 points in the new amendment. But the government and the parliament did not keep their promise. And only few points, the university entrance. Students asked for not only university entrance, but also examination system. Current examination system is pass-fail examination system, rote learning. And students asked for formative assessment, supporting their learning. So the key changes students do not receive.
You were a key member of the NLD. You're an auxiliary member of the NLD's Central Executive Committee. You've been a member since 1988, but now no longer. There was a slightly controversial split. How did it feel to have to leave the NLD in order to prioritise your role with the NNER?
Personally, I don't want to leave NLD because I am a member of NLD since at the beginning in 1988. So I have a good relationship with all members, and I want to work for the party. But that moment, when students are protesting against the national education law, and students asked for four-party dialogue, and students invited me to participate in the dialogue. So at that moment, the NLD did not want me to participate in the four-party dialogue. I have to choose one at that moment. So I stood at the side of the student because the students are asking for education reform, what I support it, and what is needed for the country. So I stood at the side of the student at the time.
The party, no matter how many seats it wins in the upcoming election, won't have control over key ministries, defence, border protection, home affairs. Education is a portfolio that the NLD might be able to have some control over when the new government is formed. Should they be taking education into their as a part of their campaign, and new education policy as a part of their campaign?
Yes, I think so. NLD should take the education as the election campaign. It is also for the party and for the whole country to change education. So NLD should take and responsible for education reform.
Okay, Thein Lwin, thank you very much for speaking to us today.